Hello, and welcome to another episode of Security Shorts with Scott. Super excited to have Mark Whittley with us today. He is the Managing Director of Sicarius, based out of one of my favorite places, Australia. So if you've listened to a previous episode, you know that I spent 4 years in Sydney. So anytime I get an Australian on the podcast, I always start by saying howdy, hello, good day. And I'm jealous of the beautiful Melbourne and Sydney lifestyle. So, Mark, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Scott. Great to be with you.
Appreciate it, Mark. Now, obviously, a lot of our audience is North America based. So would love to just sort of get a little bit of background about yourself and Sicarius and how you sort of got into the industry.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Scott. By the way, nice accent on the g'day there. You did quite well. I've been in incident response and digital forensics for a long time. I started off almost 20 years ago now in law enforcement, in anti-corruption roles and those kinds of digital forensic or high-tech investigations. I moved into the Australian Federal Police, which I guess is our equivalent of your FBI, investigating a lot of transnational crimes, drugs, child exploitation, that sort of thing. And after a few years, went over to Europe, working for aid agencies in a computer forensic capability, investigating, again, corruption type issues with donor funds, and was lucky enough to go to a large pharmaceutical company in Switzerland for a few years as well. Really honed my incident response capabilities there, large organisation, lots of trade secrets, getting attacked quite often. Came back home and rejoined the Australian Federal Police for a number of years. Lucky enough to go then to Asia, focusing building a team for digital forensics incident response in Asia for a number of years. And then recently came home and looked around with my partner, and we just looked at the devastation that's been caused to Australian and New Zealand businesses through cyber attacks, and we changed gears quite quickly and then hyper-focused back here. So I'm really proud of the work that we can do here to try and help some companies defend a little bit better, but also respond to cyber attack.
That's a great background. I looked it up ahead of time, and it's very, very comprehensive. So thanks for sharing. And one of the things that people don't realize is just how much in the center of the threat world Australia and New Zealand is. And the reason, obviously, is geopolitically, a lot of engagement with China, definitely and actually globally, supply chain, obviously the minerals and the mining sectors are massive, critically important to so much of the modern manufacturing that we do these days. And so what's your sort of view on the threat landscape when it comes to Australia and New Zealand? And maybe is it the same or is it different than maybe what people are seeing around the world?
Yeah, it's concerning. We know that Australia and New Zealand, we're the second most attacked region in the world behind the US, which is per capita, that is, of course. But that's for a number of reasons. One of them you touched on. There is some geopolitical issues that, there was a lot of fallout from the Australian government stance on COVID and things like that. So there was a lot of state-sponsored attacks. I think, though, that we're probably more susceptible to attacks because, and we see this actually, there's a parallel with the drug trade to Australia. We're a wealthy country, Australia and New Zealand. We are, heavily IT dependent, and we may not be as ahead in cybersecurity matters as we should be. And unfortunately, I think there's a trend, or there's a belief with attack groups that we will pay a ransom, even though there's a real intrinsic belief that we don't do those sorts of things. I think when your hair's on fire, you'll pretty much do anything.
Yep.
So for those, yes, we have seen it. There's a large threat. There's a lot of effort for us to get better defended and smarter and more aware, and that's having some impact. But still, we are seeing incredible amounts of attacks coming in.
Yep. Yeah. No, I know in my 4 years down there, it was a very, way more eye of the storm than people would think as far as the activity. A lot of stuff going on. And that sort of pivots me to the next thing, which is what are you sort of seeing as the most common threat vectors or reasons why companies are being breached?
I think there's a couple of reasons. Now, obviously, there's targeted attacks and there's sort of, chance attacks. We know, obviously, that the objective of any attacker is to get inside a network by any means, elevate their permissions, and then traverse the network looking for value. So that could be stealing data or encrypting data or stealing trade secrets, things like that. There's really two ways, common ways, the most common ways that can happen. Attackers spend a lot of time examining a target for their internet-facing services, their web servers, their email servers, those sorts of things. Probing, looking for weaknesses, how can they leverage it? Even, trawling the darknet, looking for previously compromised accounts, trying to use those accounts inside those systems to gain access. The second way is by attacking the human, attacking the user through phishing attacks. Still very prominent, and that's another global trend. That's not unique to us, but I think even in the last, 14 to 21 days, there has been a massive spike in the number of phishing attacks. They're getting more and more sophisticated. Obviously, the point then is that if a user clicks on a link or opens a document, does the wrong thing, that can drop a little bit of code on a computer or a device, gives the attacker a foothold, and then they can start to do the same sort of attacks that, they try and leverage normally. So the best, what you can do there is a couple of things. I mean, they are the two most prominent ways to get into a customer's environment or a company's environment. I'd say in the first instance with, attacking the internet-facing services, just make sure you've got tighter controls on them, eliminate unnecessary services, regularly patch, that's a big one, update your hardware, your software, and constant monitoring. Monitor your devices, make sure that they will be attacked. If you're monitoring, you'll see attempts all the time. Yep. Some get further than others, but if you're not looking, you miss it. And so in the second instance, when it's attacked the human, I think user awareness training is still a massive one, teaching people, and that goes for your family too. I can't tell you how many of my family members message me saying, what is this? Is this legitimate or not? So training people on how to spot, or at least be suspicious, to ask a question about something is critical. And I really believe that has such a massive impact. Again, monitoring platforms, monitoring systems is the way to go there as well. Some will get through, and you want to make sure that you can spot that.
Yeah, we call it wartime and peacetime. So the problem is you're only at wartime. Everyone's like, do I need monitoring and response and detection and response capabilities? We're like, well, you're at war 5% of the time. Do you have the tools and the capacity to withstand that? And then how do you add value in the 95%? This is where you go to hardening your people, hardening your systems, right? Patching, user awareness training. I am the phishing tool for my family. It feels like they constantly call me and ask me if they should click on something. The answer is always no. So I totally get it.
Yeah.
Mark, do you still see, and I've been doing this for 25 years now, but this whole it won't happen to me thing, I still see it. But are you? Yeah. Is it different in Australia, New Zealand? Is it getting better? What's your sort of take on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's interesting. I have definitely seen a change in the awareness levels of businesses and individuals. It's come a long way, particularly, I'd say, since pre-COVID, where there was a lot of, I call it security through obscurity. They just think, well, I'm too small, no one's going to come after me, and if they do, who cares? I don't have anything on you anyway. But that's changed fairly quickly too. I think there's a few reasons for it. Largely, there's a lot more media attention. In Australia, New Zealand, we've suffered our fair share of big known cyber breaches, like the Medibank or Optus breach, things like that. That gets a lot of coverage. Unfortunately, that's just the big end of town. The smaller end of town doesn't get any coverage and often has much more devastating consequences. But I think also we see in our business schools, in our training programs for business leaders, they have more awareness training in cyber risk. So that's actually getting embedded inside companies more as well. We also have, the federal government has a large number of initiatives, like the Australian Cybersecurity Centre is doing a great job. We've now got a federal minister for cybersecurity whose role is to get us to be the most cyber protected country in the world. And we also have our pressures from insurance companies and privacy commissioners and things like that. So there's legislation and there's financial reasons why people are getting aware. Interestingly, for me, one of the things that I see happening now is that other companies in supply chains are starting to ask questions of their partners. You know, what do you guys do? How can you tell us that you're going to be able to trade, you know, if you get hit? And that's important. I mean, down here, I think the current level of attack is about one business every 7 minutes gets attacked in Australia and New Zealand. After that attack, the initial attack, the attacker's sitting there for 6 months undetected on average, or even longer. Yeah. Right. So this is powerful stuff. And if people are just doing the security through obscurity, then the consequences can be severe. So people are starting to educate themselves. They're starting to, you know, ask questions. What can we do? And then go out and look for the right partners. It's difficult for these guys. You know, as you know, there's not always a lot of internal knowledge on cybersecurity matters in a lot of businesses. Yeah. So it's tough to ask yourself some questions sometimes.
Yeah, it's a daunting black box, right? If you're out there trying to make your widgets in a competitive world. We do see insurance putting some nice policies and goals around small, medium businesses. That's seen in the U.S. and parts of Asia. And I call it supply chain compliance. This one's becoming a really big one. We have quite a few customers that we really help them get their supply chain compliance solved really quickly. It actually becomes a business advantage because they're able to come in and say, look at how good our security program is and how well it's run and the monitoring, the detection. And so that supply chain compliance is something that we're just seeing a lot more of. And I think you're going to continue to see it. So we see it in the movie industries, we see it in the medical industries. So I definitely some synergy there from what we're seeing on in some of the spaces we're working.
Yeah, right.
So we all know that the big end of town, right? They've got people, they got money, they've got systems, they can play with all the fancy toys, they got plenty of time. We know that small, medium businesses, this is something that most of the time they just want to get it off their plate, right? They want to get back to doing their job. This is not something I equate it to like having to deal with taxes. It's like you sort of know you have to do it, but you don't really want to, but so you sort of delay it, you push it off as long as possible. Like, what do you recommend to small, medium businesses to sort of maybe get over that hump of like, it's not so scary, or these are things that you could do to make it easier to consume?
Yeah. So we do talk to a lot of companies down here about that. A lot of manufacturing groups, for example, or different sectors. I think one of the first things that has to happen is a business has to make cyber defense, cybersecurity one of their key priorities, right? It has to be known that the organization is working on this, right? This is one of our objectives, this year and next year and whatever else, right? So take some ownership over it and be proud about it too, So we are doing this. Tell your shareholders, tell your stakeholders. I think also you have to address what capabilities a business does have technically from this perspective, in security and risk, especially cyber. Assign responsibility to individuals in the company for implementing programs or research and things like that. So it's not just something that we say we're going to do, we're actually got someone who's going to do it, I think you made an excellent point. The big end of town, they do have the resources, they do have the money, they do have the drive. Smaller guys are focused on, manufacturing parts and things like that. It's not something that they have a defined individual for. So I say to those types of businesses, you can go out and seek as much advice as you want from your peers, from other companies that are trying to do this. People have been bashed up by cyber attacks before. Take advantage of some free advice, whether it be from the government. We at Sicarius, we developed a simple document called Project Sentry that outlines, a dozen things that people can go and do right now, and it tries to explain it. Go and seek out those sorts of little pieces of advice and start to implement them. You don't have to implement everything. You don't have to eat the whole pie at once. You can take off little bites and you'll get there. I also think that performing regular assessments or compromise assessments in your environment. I mentioned the 6-month dwell time. That's an ideal window. Every 3 months you do a compromise assessment, you're more than likely going to see that someone's been pushing or may have gained access before the worst happens. I think you should go out and find security solutions or vendors. Soul Cyber's got a great suite. I love it. It's a complete package for bugger all cost, I think. So you can offload all of the technical areas that really you don't understand. You wouldn't know how to implement perhaps or maintain it. Go and find a partner like Soul Cyber to do that for you. And I think probably the last thing that I would encourage, and I do encourage, is have a plan in place. Sit down, think about what's going to happen. If something happens, who's got responsibility for what? How are we going to respond? Who is our trusted partner to come in and help us? Those sorts of questions, and test your plan. Make sure it works. Make sure everybody knows it exists. Probably don't leave a copy of your plan sitting on a computer that could be hacked. Make sure you've got a soft copy in case you get locked out. A hard copy on your shelf in case you get locked out of computers. But, practice it. And challenge yourself too. Ask the tough questions. What if we do get attacked? What's going to happen to me? What happens if I lose my whole network and I can't make parts anymore, or I can't make these shipments anymore? What's the cost of doing something now versus the cost of doing something when your hair's on fire? They're important questions. And, we, in our experience anyway, we see a lot of the little easy victories. And I mentioned Project Century before. It's a document that contains easy victories. We believe that if nine out of 10 businesses that we've helped recover from a cyber incident, if they enacted those, they wouldn't be calling us in the first place. They wouldn't have to. So talking to people, getting some advice, keep asking questions, keep challenging yourself, keep practicing, keep planning. You'll be in a much better place.
I love that. You hit on one of the things that really, I every time I talk to a customer, is I tell customers, go talk to somebody like Mark and build a beginning plan. I said, because in my personal life, whether or not it's cleaning the garage or building a company, it's all overwhelming until I just say, these are the 7 things I need to do, right? Or the 10 things. And a lot of times, I'm not an accounting expert. So when, I go and talk to our CFO. So getting that plan, and it doesn't have to be the full blown plan. It can be a really basic. And all of a sudden that sort of takes away this fear and uncertainty that this thing is going to be overwhelming in a project that sort of swamps the company. And so I strongly recommend companies to go talk to, people that can really come in and give them a very practical understanding of what sort of takes to get going. And I find that once companies do that, all of a sudden they go, oh, this is relatively straightforward. It's just like anything else. You just sort of make your steps, and at the end of it, you've finished your tasks and you're in a really good spot. So I do love that, Mark. Yeah. It's really important. Mark, listen, I really appreciate the time. Anything else going on with Sicarius, or where can companies find you?
Well, we're at sicarius.com.au. You obviously just hit the website and you'll get to us. We do a number of things. We do digital forensics, we do incident response, we do compromise assessments, a number of other sort of more secret squirrel type services for some clients. But if anybody needs some advice, even free, we're here to help people. Like I said at the outset, we particularly have eyes on our region here because, to be frank, Scott, we're sick of getting kicked in the guts, right? Yeah. So we all have access to resources and capability to really improve our posture and make the attackers suffer. If someone walks up the street and they see a house that's less protected, no bars, no fence, that sort of thing, that's the one they're going to try and attack. So, companies, be brave, build yourself up, make it too hard for them to come and attack you. They'll move on. So please talk to us anytime.
Absolutely. And I'll echo Mark's statement for everybody on the phone. It's a community here. So we're always trying to help companies. And everybody I know in the information security space gives out free advice, free consulting, because we just want companies to get stronger. So Mark, as always, very much appreciate you jumping on the call. You have an amazing background, so I know the audience will love to hear about that, and obviously the advice and the recommendations of how to continue to secure the globe, but obviously ANZ in particular. So thank you very much for joining us, and to the audience, as always, thank you for joining Security Shorts with Scott.